North Korea is a mysterious country that is perceived in different ways. For some, this is a state with nuclear weapons and a population. For others, it is like a huge concentration camp with censorship and no progress. Some consider the DPRK to be the country that defeated communism, the victim of a global conspiracy. It is important to remember that this country is also inhabited by people who did not choose it before birth. How they live and what myths and ideas are associated with the DPRK, we will tell in the next few minutes, starting from the period of the Second World War. After the Second World War, when the victorious powers began to divide the world into spheres of influence, the Korean War took place, which became one of the many conflicts in history. This war is connected with an ironic situation. Japan surrendered too quickly, and the Allies did not have time to agree on the fate of the territories that were to be taken from the Japanese. There was no clarity even regarding the division of defeated Japan during the Civil War. The US and USSR eventually came to an agreement at conferences such as Yalta and Cairo to take Japan's colonies away from Japan, but did not have time to agree on how to govern these territories and what to do next. World War II could have gone on a little longer, and perhaps there would have been less bloodshed in subsequent years if the US and USSR had agreed earlier. However, Japan was quickly subjugated, and the great powers had to act impromptu. Under the pretext of fighting Japan, the USSR sent its troops to the north of Korea. On August 10, 1945, Dina Rusk and Charles Bonstilu were given the task of establishing an American occupation zone in Korea and began distributing leaflets warning the population of the imminent arrival of the American military. However, ordinary Koreans were not particularly counseled, despite being under Japanese occupation since 1910, surviving World War II, and also seeking independence. The Japanese government, which was in its final days, tried to keep the initiative and handed over official power to Yin Hyun, a Korean who was equally respected in North and South Korea. He was a patriot and nationalist who sought to unite all political forces in Korea. It worked out pretty well initially. On September 4, 1945, the People's Committee's Congress proclaimed the establishment of the People's Republic of Korea. The government was formed from representatives of all political forces, regardless of their relations with the US and the USSR. The Japanese system of law was dismantled locally, and a system of people's committees was organized in its place. In general, this suited the Koreans, but, unfortunately, no one was interested in the specific opinion of the residents. The northern part of the country was occupied by the USSR, while in the south the 24th Army Corps of General Hodge was hastily deployed. He stated that the US was establishing a military administration in Korea, without considering the fact that the country already had an administration that very few people were interested in. The United States did not recognize the People's Republic of Korea, and their negotiators did not even begin a dialogue with the arriving military. They literally pushed out the politicians of the Republic block by block as their troops moved. In response to this, the USSR officially recognized the People's Republic of Korea and protested. As a result of this situation, a stalemate arose. Although there was a Korean government, in practice the country was divided between the US and the USSR along the 38th parallel. Even worse was that the line of demarcation by sea was not agreed upon, and there are still conflicts there. In 1945, the situation became even worse. The Moscow Conference in December attempted to stabilize the situation, but was unsuccessful due to disagreements between America and the Soviets. The Koreans were dissatisfied with the fact that other colonizers came to them instead of the Japanese colonizers. The USSR dealt with the negative sentiment by declaring support for an independent Republic of Korea, when in reality the Northern People's Committees were completely controlled by the Soviets. The United States simply used force to achieve this, and until 1948 both camps strengthened their positions on the peninsula, as a result of which the Republic of Korea ceased to exist. After 3 years of military administration, the Americans found a government capable of supporting U.S. policy, and on August 15, 1948, the creation of the Republic of Korea, recognized by the UN, was proclaimed. However, there was one nuance. Participation in the elections was forbidden to the communists by the American military mission. According to opinion polls, about 70% of South Koreans in 1948 supported socialist ideas in one way or another. In fact, the regime of Syngman Rhee, the son of the first leader of the Republic of Korea, turned out to be dictatorial. During the Chejuan Uprising, government forces violently suppressed the protests, killing about 20,000 protesters. In general, the southern part of Korea was difficult to manage. The same can be said about the north. Although on paper they continued to support the vanished Republic of Korea, in practice all power was concentrated in the hands of the Provisional People's Committee of North Korea under the leadership of Kim Il-sung. In response to South Korea's independence, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea was proclaimed on September 9, 1948. The situation was reminiscent of China, where two big parties, supported by the US and the USSR, fought for power and claimed the entire territory of the country. At that time, a civil war was raging in China, and a similar conflict was inevitable in Korea. North Korea moved far away from South Korea and first of all nationalized 90% of enterprises, essentially establishing a dictatorship. Although it should be noted that the standard of living in North Korea grew faster than in South Korea, and it recovered more quickly from the effects of World War II. For a while, the two Koreas hoped that something would happen that would unite the country without war. Perhaps this could have been the Jeju Rebellion, but after its brutal suppression, the point of no return was crossed. Moreover, the Communists won in China, and the USSR finally got an atomic bomb, which equalized the chances in a global conflict with the United States. After these events, Stalin stopped ignoring Kim Il-sung's requests and provided him with advisors and military instructors. On June 25, 1950, the Korean War began, which we talked about in a separate video. In short, first the DPRK won and captured Seoul, then South Korea, with the help of the UN, defeated and captured Pyongyang, and then China, with the help of the DPRK, captured Seoul again. As a result, the front stabilized at the beginning of the war, and Korea was finally divided. Kim Il-sung instantly established an absolute dictatorship and a planned economy in the DPRK. By 1956, industry and agriculture had returned to pre-war levels. Kim spent 20 out of 30 days traveling around the country and controlled everything down to the smallest detail, including the location of pipes and smokehouses. Then there was a turning point in the history of the DPRK. At the 20th Congress of the Central Committee of the CPSU in the USSR, the so-called thaw began, with the release of the repressed and the emergence of similar processes. The USSR expected the satellites to follow suit, but Kim Il-sung strongly opposed it. He retained power by force, repressed all those who disagreed, and destroyed the extreme pockets of opposition. The so-called August factional incident in 1956. It was at this time that the DPRK finally isolated itself even from the USSR. In 1960, the situation became even worse, as the DPRK also became isolated from China after its split from the USSR. Kim Il-sung tried to take a neutral position, supporting both China and the USSR, but on the edge. On the one hand, he continued to support China, for which he was convicted in the USSR. On the other hand, Kim Il-sung did not fully copy the Chinese model. It was during this period that the idea of Juche arose, which exists to this day. This policy invites the country to operate exclusively on its own. Juche became the official state ideology in the DPRK, replacing the ideas of Lenin and Mao Zedong. However, Kim Il-sung's ambitions to translate this ideology into practice ran into difficulties. Firstly, agriculture in the country suffered due to insufficient attention and concentration of forces on industry and the army. Secondly, the DPRK did not possess oil and could not carry out foreign trade to obtain the necessary resources at the best price, since the Juche policy prohibited such actions. The 1970s and 1980s were a difficult period for the DPRK. Kim Il-sung refused to cut funding for the army, which led to a default in 1980. Until 2000, the country's economy stagnated. However, after the arrival of Kim Jong Un, the son of Kim Il-sung, in 1994 a small thaw began. South Koreans began to visit North Korea, and free trade zones were established in the country. The DPRK tried to repeat the experience of China and its free provinces, but with limited success. Agriculture still lagged behind, and a famine in 1996 to 1999 claimed the lives of up to 3 million people. Since the 2000s, the DPRK has been developing the business of small entrepreneurs who trade and deliver goods to China and South Korea. Total repression still exists in the country, although executions and public shootings are rare. In 2013, under the leadership of Kim Jong Un, the grandson of Kim Il-sung, for the first time, a crop was harvested sufficient for the entire population of the country. North Korea also put a satellite into orbit earlier than South Korea. Since 2014, private companies have been allowed to purchase equipment at market prices anywhere. In general, there is a certain market economy in the DPRK. However, all these moments are limited by the inviolability of the Communist Party and the unpredictability of its actions. North Korea has not been a Stalinist regime since the 2000s. The business of small entrepreneurs is developing in the country, although total repression still exists. The situation in the country, including its interaction with South Korea and trade, alternates with threats and announcements of the creation of nuclear weapons. However, it should be noted that the DPRK is still an active participant in the world economy and politics, and it should not be considered only as a meme state.